policies and programs and assuring that the environment is well maintained so that it can support the prosperity of society without gender discrimination. Next. Ladies and gentlemen, please have a look at these pictures. These are the pictures describing the condition of environment and forests as life sources. Unfortunately, in practices, environment and forests are frequently damaged due to the human behaviors and natural disasters. The obligation of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry to achieve gender equality and equity is regulated in the President Instruction number 9, year 2000 on gender mainstreaming in the national development. The problem is how the Ministry of Environment and Forestry can assure the sustainability of gender mainstreaming implementation in achieving gender equity and equality. Next, ladies and gentlemen, this article discusses how the dynamic governance of Ministry of Environment and Forestry is carried out to actualize gender equality and equity. The discussion of dynamic governance will be divided into two parts. First, discussing the government capability in achieving gender equality and equity. Second, discussing the government culture in achieving gender equality and equity. And lastly, this paper also discusses how the government capability and government culture synergize in achieving gender equality and equity. Next. Ladies and gentlemen, this article was written based on descriptive qualitative research at the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. These informants were selected purposely. The data were collected through questionnaires, focus group discussion, and documentation studies. The data were analyzed in qualitative descriptive. Next. Ladies and gentlemen, the research reveals that the capacity of Ministry of Environment and Forestry in realizing gender equality and equity can be classified into three categories, namely thinking ahead, thinking again, and thinking across. First, thinking ahead. Thinking ahead at the ministry is carried out based on three things, namely, the ministry must contribute to improving gender equality and equity in Indonesia. Second, the ministry must ensure that gender mainstreaming is internalized in all work units. Third, the ministry must ensure that efforts to achieve gender equality and equity are linked to global commitments on gender and environment. The main result of thinking ahead is that all work units have incorporated gender perspective into their planning and budget through gender tracking. Then the second is thinking again. The Ministry of Environment and Forestry is rethinking the existing policies and programs by assessing the relevance of those policies and programs toward the national agenda on gender equality and equity. If ministries' policies and programs are not gender responsive, they should be revised to meet the criteria. The main revision to existing policies are developing a guideline for formulating gender responsive strategic plan of Ministry of Environment and Forestry. Second, developing a gender mainstreaming roadmap of Ministry of Environment and Forestry. as the basis for work units in formulating gender-responsive operational technical policies. And the last is thinking across. The Ministry of Environment and Forestry cooperated with other ministries in developing innovation for supporting gender equality and equity, such as collaborating with other ministries that have received award on gender mainstreaming implementation. Second, collaboration with gender experts, and third, collaborating with international funding institutions. Having discussed government capabilities at ministry, let's now discuss government culture to achieve gender equality and equity. Next, there are four elements of government culture. First, shared norm. The Ministry of Environment and Forestry has set norms as a common reference for all work units in developing a gender-responsive environment and forestry, namely equitable development and sustainable environment. The two norms are used for developing the two pillars of Ministry of Environment and Forestry, namely the sustainability of forest and environmental resources and the welfare of society, both men and women. They are used for determining the ministry's strategic target. The second element of government culture is clear rules. The rules of the game that must be obeyed by each work unit at the ministry are no one will be left behind, fair in process and equal in the results. Based on the game rules, all activities must not discriminate gender. To ensure that each work unit must formulate gender tagging in their programs or activities. Ladies and gentlemen, the third government culture is coordination and integration. Here, we have two activities to support coordination and integration. First, Ministry of Environment formed Gender Mainstreaming Working Group, and the rules of Gender Mainstreaming Work Group are coordinating and synchronizing the program. Finally, the regularity of behavior. Compiling a gender analysis in planning and budgeting, namely gender analysis pathway and gender budget statement. All of the government culture becoming a normative glue for all members of the organization. Next. Here is the synergy of government capabilities and culture in adaptation and innovation of gender responsive policy. Here we know that government capability and government culture synergize to make adaptation and innovation. If government capability and government culture are synergized, so gender equality and equity can be achieved. Next. The next one is the ministry innovation. Based on policy adoption and policy adaptation, the ministry developed innovation to make gender equality and equity. The innovation made by the ministry in realizing gender equality are first, policy innovation, second, organizational innovation, third, human resources innovation, Fourth, collaborative innovation. Fifth, gender responsive infrastructure innovation. Six, online-based gender learning media innovation. And finally, product innovation. Next. The conclusion are: first, dynamic governance in Ministry of Environment and Forestry is shown by the government capability and government culture to synergize in realizing gender equality and equity. The main driver of the dynamic governance at the Ministry of Environment and Forestry is the strong desire of the leadership of Ministry of Environment and Forestry. Finally, the synergy between government capability and government culture driven the performance of gender mainstreaming work group makes the Ministry of Environment and Forestry more easily to carry out policy adoption and policy adaptation to make innovation develop to support the realization of gender equality and equity. That's all I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nurhaini, for the keynote speech. For all the participants, you can use the chat facility in the Zoom room meeting to post your question or comments on the speech of our speakers today. But our Q&A session will be held after we listen to the second speaker for today's session. Let me introduce our second speakers. Professor Dr. Svetlana Bodronova was born in Gomel region, Belarus, former USSR, and then moved with her family to St. Petersburg, Russia. She got her BA in International Journalism from St. Petersburg State University. She held 2 MAs in Public Relations, Public Communication, and International Journalism from St. Petersburg State University and the University of Westminster, United Kingdom. Her PhD in political science is from St. Petersburg State University. Currently, she is a professor of the Department of Mass Media Management, School of Journalism and Mass Communication, also the head of Center for International Media Research and the chair for Master Program in Media Communication, all of them in the St. Petersburg State University. She wrote many papers, book chapters, and books during her career as a scholar, and she won not one, but 2 first prizes for National Association of Mass Media Researchers. The 2 prizes of 2014 and 2019 make Professor Bodronova the only Russian scholar who has so far received 2 NAMIS awards. She is co-creator and host of International Conference Comparative Media Studies in Today's World since 2013 and sits as editorial board member in several Scopus Index journals, including Scopus Q1 Digital Journalism. In this 6th EcoSub 2020, she will present her paper entitled The Contested Role of Public Spheres in Today's Social Stability and Sustainability. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome for Professor Bodronova.
Thanks for this generous introduction. I welcome this conference and I'm very glad and grateful for the invitation. Salam alaikum. I do hope you hear me well and can listen to me. Now I will switch on into my presentation. My topic is very different from what you've heard now, but with one thing, innovation versus stability, these topics are very much interlinked. And I will start from this. And I will show you my screen now. Yeah, hopefully you can see it well. Yes, I will be speaking about the role of communication, of public communication, and especially online communication in how we understand social stability and how we support it. But first of all, I need to ask, do we need stability? do we need sustainability? Because these things are very different and might be even opposing each other. And before speaking about the role of communication in the public sphere, a special social imaginary about social communication, we need to ask whether we need stability, whether stability is good for the society. Because as we have just heard, innovation is very important too. And there is an important dilemma between stability versus innovation, stability versus change, stability versus future development. In Russia, where I come from now, where I reside, where I've been residing for over 25 years in my life, there is a huge and quite open conflict between different strata of the society, which we find actually four different Russias, so to say, in Natalia Zubarevich's speech, because she is a social economic scholar, and she says there's like four different Russias which behave differently, consume differently, and communicate differently. And one Russia is Russia of cosmopolitan innovators, people who speak languages, people who like travel, people who've been traveling abroad, people who work as white collars, and so on and so forth, and people of stability Russia, stability seekers who don't want change, more or less, who sort of live in post-Soviet mind, in post-Soviet patterns of values. And this conflict actually shapes how Russia behaves politically, how Russia behaves culturally, how Russia behaves in terms of group interaction, in terms of value competition, and so on and so forth. So do we have any, like in such circumstances, with societies that actually polarize today quite a lot, how do we understand the sustainable society? What features are to be there for a society to be considered sustainable? And from a communicative point of view, from a communication side, where I come from communication science, one of the answers, just one of the answers, it's not like overall answer, but just one of possible answers, of which I'm going to talk today. Stable and sustainable society means a society capable of consensus, society capable of finding a way of agreement, finding a way of agreeing on where to go without struggling between social groups, you know, without a war, without a big conflict, without dissociation of a society. So Jürgen Habermas, of whom many of you have probably heard, who is, thank God, still alive today, he has dedicated his life in academia, in scholarship, to discussion of how we regain communitarian sort of common rules for us, common grounds for agreement, if a communist project is dead. How do we find a way between the dead and insufficient communism and the Western individualism, which promotes individual rights rather than communitarian agreement, and finding ways of such agreement in the society? So he was trying to refine the normative grounds of social consensus. He has created a book as early as 1962, of which you probably know much better than I do. And he was writing about Öffentlichkeit, the structural change of the status of publicity, how bourgeoisie entered the sphere of decision-making in the UK, in England at that moment, in Germany, and in France, Britain, and Germany consecutively. So he was trying to show how the number of people who were participating in public discussion, in decision-making, how it was growing and how some issues became public. And this public-private debate was, of course, not only Habermas's concern, but many people before him and many people after him. But still, what he did is that after 27 years, his translators into English, people who translated his book, tried to translate the term Öffentlichkeit from German. And they created public sphere, probably having in mind noosphere by the Russian scholar Vernadsky, or any other biosphere, for example. So public sphere is sort of an imaginary place where public discussion and public contestation takes place. For Habermas, this change of name of his book was first a surprise, and then he sort of embraced it and started to use it. When he developed his theory of public sphere, he spoke also, and other scholars also spoke of public arenas. So public sphere as an imaginary place consists of real public arenas where people get access and discuss in a special way. So this way is called deliberation, right? So this deliberative discussion means a round table discussion. So one speaks, then another one, then another one, then another one. If they find consensus, the process stops. If they do not, the process goes again, round after round. And you can see this very clearly today in a German parliament, in the European Parliament, how this round table discussion, round table-like discussion takes place. And there are several prerequisites for this to be happening. First of all, Habermas speaks of people's rationality. People need to be rational to be able to discuss things like that, right? So they need to be able to pose rational argument. Then Habermas insists that people have internal concerns that allow them to find out truth. So people actually want to know what the things are and how the things go. And people want to ultimately find an agreement, because otherwise you cannot move on. So public sphere is a place where people seek agreement, where people seek out truth. They're rational and they communicate in a very respected and very respectful way, which of course is very idealistic. In reality, people do not do that. In reality, some other things happen. And criticism of Habermas came already like after a couple of years of his English language publication. He was very much criticized. I do not know any communication scholar in Europe who hasn't criticized Habermas in a way. Like everyone speaks about Habermas' theory and everyone knows it and everyone knows how bad it is. He was criticized both from the right, from conservative and more liberal positions, and from the left, from more socialist positions, so to say, liberal socialist positions. And the criticism from the right, so to say, was, first of all, that people are not rational. People have emotions, people have hidden interests, people have sometimes people have low capability of thinking. People are sometimes not educated, and so on and so forth. So people are not that ideal as Habermas actually thought. Then if people agree, it means that there is a consensus, but some people might disagree. And it means that the majority has a hegemony over a minority. So this is an imbalance of power between people. And one voice must be just as important as 1,000 other voices, as Chantal Mouffe said. So please do not disregard those who disagree. And do not seek a consensus, because in these terms, consensus is bad. And competition is much more important, much more needed, and is normal. Also, public communication is based on a lot of discriminations by gender, by age, by race, by public status, by money, but whatsoever. You can find any other reason for discriminate each other. And this is why discriminated people gather in discriminated communities. And these communities become counter communities and form counter public spheres to discuss their own issues. So we see not one, but multiple public spheres. And there's a symbolic competition of public spheres, which is a much more complicated picture. You cannot find an overall blessed agreement. There will be a constant competition of symbolic power. Also, from the left side, Habermas was criticized because real public spheres are based on a lot of inequalities. Inequalities in access to public deliberation and inequalities of influencing decision-making. Some public spheres have more influence upon decision-making than other public spheres, other counter-public spheres, for example. And from both sides, there was also a lot of criticism concerning the role of media in public deliberation, because this role of media became a separate entity of criticism, became a separate sort of, object of criticism for a lot of communication and social science scholars. And mediated communication was actually destroying the idea of this consensus, despite that, for example, public TV was trying to bring on this public consensus by showing people's minds from the very different political positions, by bringing on public affairs issues, and so on and so forth. So even those media that actually were dedicated to doing a public sphere, making a public sphere, doing public deliberation, were highly criticized for how they do their job, and how wider social communication is also structured very bad in terms of reaching the normative consensus. Media became, indeed, in most societies around the world by the 90s, media already were the key actors in the media-based public sphere. And they became vessels inside the system of public communication. But the criticism that was rising towards media, especially television at that moment, was not only based on the idea that television, for example, can fix your mind, can do something intentionally to make you behave in a different way. Of course, people remembered of the Hitler propaganda, of the Soviet very solid organization of communication, of public communication, of propaganda, agitation, and so on by Lenin and whatever, and the post-war Soviet communication. People remembered that. But also people on the West realized that actually television there has a lot of different effects that they were not thinking about creating television. And it's not only intentionally that people can fix your mind. So mind-fixing industry, media industry as a mind-fixing industry was one part of criticism. But a bigger part of criticism that actually rose was that media have inherent features, even if we want to be very good and to create very good television, very good public entity, still television, print press, radio, and later internet and internet media will have biases and structural disparities and distortions that will not allow people to be very fully informed and very equal in access to communication. So the structural biases and media effects that media pose upon the society, for example, like a spiral of silence written about Noel Neumann in the 80s, in 70s and 80s, which means that the dominant opinion starts to be really dominant. One of the opinions starts to be dominant by like going wider and wider, and the other opinion becomes silenced in the society. And this is how, for example, candidates at elections, one wins, one loses, by how the spiral actually goes wider and wider. Habermas has answered to this criticism in a paradoxical way, to my viewpoint. It's quite a paradox if you read his works and you see how he reacts on different parts of criticism. From the criticism coming from the left side, that public spheres are unequal, he writes, yes, indeed, public spheres are unequal, and he criticized something that he calls verticalization of the public sphere, which means that political entities, media, and big corporations start to be dominant and treat horizontal communication as vertical. So they sort of impose what they want upon a society. And refeudalization means that before democratization, in like 18th century, 17th century, public sphere and decision-making in countries of Europe was feudal, which means it was encapsulated in small, tiny elites. And then it opened up to wider people. But he says that when media link to politics today, they create again those feudal capsulas that do not allow people to judge who stands behind communication, whose interests are promoted via television, for example. So he criticizes this refeudalization of the public sphere. But interestingly, so he wants this, he doesn't want these capsulas, you know, these capsules to exist. But on the other side, he says, okay, consensus, public consensus is really very normative. It's ideal, it cannot be reached. So what we need is internally pluralistic public spheres. So it means there must be different parts, there must be different capsules, so to say, inside the public spheres, which discuss their own issues. So I think this is a bit sort of paradoxical response to criticism from all the sides. But the major thing here is that the very idea of idealistic consensus is not that challenged. We still need to find agreement to move back. He still means that people want to know, and people want to find an agreement, want to find a consensus. So our internal wish is to find how to agree. But when social media appeared, we started to think that this is not true. This is actually not true at all. In 1998, Habermas starts to count in network forms of communication. He starts to think of this horizontal networked communication which came together with internet. And already early research that now could assess how people communicate to each other, having in mind their political views. And Sunstein and other people of early internet research of the late 90s, beginning of the years 2000, found out that a fundamental feature of public discussion was polarization. People do not want actually to agree. If they come different into communication, into a discussion, they will not try to be like, you know, to become homogeneous. No, they will separate into parts which are more comfortable to them. They do not want to meet other views. They want to be within their filter bubbles or echo chambers with the same views. And this polarization for democracy is very ambivalent, because on one hand, when you find your co-thinkers online, it helps you mobilize. It creates agreement for mobilization. People find with whom to go to protest. And it forms social movements. It fosters greater involvement in politics, which is also good. It fosters political participation. But on the other hand, polarized communities tend to diminish communication between groups. People do not speak to opposing views, which is crucially important for the idea of the marketplace of ideas. People need to discuss across views. And this leads, an inability to discuss across views online leads to social fragmentation. So the lack of cohesion, of sustainability and stability. And the pluralism has evident paradoxes. One paradox is that when you have a lot of pluralistic discussions, small ones, it evaporates energy, people just discuss and do not sort of form big action. It becomes polarized, people become encapsulated in their minor discussions, it's reductive, it's victimized. Oh, we are so victimized by the society, how do we behave, how do we change the situation? But still this victimization is the only thing that people actually feel. And they feel incapable of change sometimes. And the second paradox is that people cannot communicate across arenas because they speak very different languages. Inside those small capsules, they develop special languages to communicate within, but then they cannot communicate across, which is a problem. And for a political web, this was a problem. And political web has survived a sort of sinusoid optimism and pessimism, because before 2005, people hoped for democratization all around the world, that internet would bring democracy. Around years 2008, it was already the web that failed. People realized that nothing is done by web. But after years 2010 and later, there was a whole wave of something that you already very well know, and it brought along the idea of connective action, that people do not need organizations to connect online. And connective action is just as ambivalent. It's not collective action where people have an organization like a party and then they do together, act together, go protest or go to elections. No, you just don't need organizations anymore to connect and go protest. And the idea of connective action is also very ambivalent, because it's, again, like polarization. It might work well for mobilization, but it doesn't work well in terms of fragmentation. I also developed the idea of contributive action as a part of connective action just very recently. It's being published now, maybe in a month, where people put something somewhere, like flash mobbing or a lot of different photos that become an action together, where people act together online to create political action. And social web was actually coming towards an understanding of a dissonant public sphere, fundamentally not seeking public agreement, fundamentally not going to agree, much more to argue than to agree. In 2013, it was already clear that there is no earnest internet, equal internet, internet with universal access, internet with no inequalities, because we have seen both new forms of economic exploitation by social media giants. Imagine Facebook, who has huge money, because we work on Facebook, create content on Facebook absolutely free of charge, free. No one pays us to create billions and billions of content pieces, of which Facebook makes a lot of money, and no one pays us back, right? There's new forms of exploitation and capitalism online, and communicative capitalism, which is quite dangerous, actually. And old social disparities, like gender disparities or ethnic disparities, come online. And we know such works that in 2002, we thought it wouldn't happen. But in 2013, we already seen that the more web develops, the more it normalizes, the more it comes to represent the society with all its disparities. In 2016, it became very evident that there are a lot of digital threats, both on the part of governments and for the governments, by people. First and foremost, it was the Snowden's revelations and the Russian involvement in the intermingling into the US presidential elections that actually rose this, like spurred this talks about how we deal with digital threats today. And by 2018, my German colleagues, my good friends, challenged the idea of the desired consensus at all. People do not come online to find stability and sustainability. People do not come to find the desired consensus. And Barbara Pfetsch from Freie Uni Berlin has written about the dissonant public spheres. And she said, we need to embrace the idea that public spheres are not about consensus, are dissonant from the very beginning. It's not that they are seeking consensus. People come online by various reasons, by not to find a consensus. And we need to find a way to work with this. We need to find how to come back to the idea of democracy with the dissonant public spheres, disruptive public spheres that are not dedicated to finding a path to future. I am adding to this my own thought, because what I have seen in my research is that people online mostly do not develop long talks. They come and say something and go, or say a couple of replics, a couple of words, a couple of sentences and go. And when people argue online, it's mostly that a lot of people of the same mind just gather together and win by accumulation, win by coming to a place and becoming a majority. And I am calling this cumulative deliberation. It's not a round table discussion of everyone with single views, so to say, with individual views. But when people come in like groups and one group beats another one, it's quite a contestive idea. And unfortunately, I'm pessimistic about the future of internet public spheres and their role in sustainable development, because we need a lot of education, a lot of media education around the world to make public discussion online and in different entities much more civilized and consensus driven and consensus oriented. But maybe it's not natural for people. Maybe it's much more natural for people to behave the way that they behave today online. And we need to know it, and we need to work with this in industry, in government, and in academia. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Bodrunova, for the speech. And now we will have the Q&A and discussion session. Unfortunately, because of our two speakers is very busy, very busy speakers. Professor Ismi will be in Jakarta this afternoon. So, and then Professor Bodrunova also have a meeting with Microsoft later on. So we will limit our Q&A for several questions. First of all, there are one question for Professor Ismi Dwi Astuti from Ms. Anjang from Universitas 11 Maret. How do the 7 forms of innovation, policies, organization, etc., can shape gender equality and equity? So, Professor Ismi, can you deliberate your answer for that question? Thank you.
Excuse me, just from toilet. Thank you, Pak As.
Yes.
Can you repeat your question, please?
Yes. How do the 7 forms of innovation, policies, organization, etc., shape gender equality and equity.
Okay, thank you for the question. The Ministry, Equality and Equity. The innovation made by the Ministry in realizing gender equality and equity are, first, say innovation. What is the meaning of policy innovation? Policy innovation is making a gender mainstreaming competition for Echelon 1 unit of the ministry. The second one, organizational innovation. That means forming a winning team for Echelon 1 unit gender mainstreaming competition. And the third one, you must strengthen resources through education and training on gender responsive planning and budgeting, online maupun and operative innovation international institution or NGO, universities, gender expert, and other ministries. The fifth, gender responsive infrastructure innovation by providing gender responsive and disability facilities. And the sixth is online-based gender learning media innovation. The ministry is creating gender learning material through the use of social media such as YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And finally, product innovation, creating some gender mainstreaming as theme merchandise. The 7 innovations have accelerated gender equality and equity to come into being.
Ismi Dwastuti. Now, several questions for Professor Budrunova. As you can see in the chat box, there are several there. But I think that's in the same train of thoughts. That's asking about what do you think about how the social media impact on the politics? They want relation between Indonesia and also in Russia. So please, Professor.
Yes, thank you. Unfortunately, I do not have a lot of time because I have to teach in several minutes. But I will try to tackle all the questions that are there, and thanks for them. They're very important, actually. Yes, social media and people's choice is a huge area of research. In terms of Russia, I was among those first people who were researching upon the impact of social media and involvement of social media into political mobilization in Russia. What we have seen, what we have found out was that actually Facebook, for example, was playing a facilitational role. So in Russia, there's platform difference between Facebook, which is seen as a more cosmopolitan platform, like for people from the cities, again, this first Russia thing, and Vkontakte or vk.com today is seen as a more like for general people and more depoliticized. So it really depends on which platform you reside. And Facebook in the protests of 2011 played a lot of facilitational roles. So it united people and sort of spread the idea of going to protest. But there was also other forms of communication. There were also other forms of communication online, like online-only media, for example, online media, who first formed a consensus. And this is very important. This was very Habermasian, so to say, Habermas-like. You first need a general feeling. You first need a consensus to go and protest. And this was formed by the audience of those online media outlets. It was 10 years ago. As for today, several platforms come and go, so to say, but still they have very big mobilization potential. Like YouTube today and Russian opposition uses YouTube videos very well. One of the latest things about the Russian protest was sort of protest of kids, people of senior school people, senior school boys and girls, who went to protest in over 40 cities of Russia after a film published on YouTube. So mobilization capacities are big, quite big, bigger than probably for parties or social movements. But still, the issue of impact upon current decision-making remains very problematic, because I don't think that till today such things have impact upon democratization, so to say. So they do not lead to democratization, but vice versa. The regime tries to oppose these movements, tries to save itself, and tries to co-opt what allows the regime to stay on. There is a paper by my friends in Germany, by my really very close connections, Anna Litvinenko and Florian Töpfel, about the strategy of gardening. Gardening, like, you know, taking care of your garden. And the power in Russia sort of takes care of political opposition online to make it small, to make it existent, but small and non-influential. So with the help of social media in more authoritarian societies, you can not only democratize, but you can also garden opposition, which is a bit pessimistic. Then another question was the requirements put forward by Habermas, the rationality. Well, I do not know what Habermas said about the COVID-19, because he was a bit silent. I think he recently, a couple of years ago, he just published a big volume, big like thick like this, very big, about other things. So maybe he's writing another book now. Yes, misinformation and disinformation. Of course, this is one of the major concerns, one of the major digital threats that we have today too, of course. The issues of COVID-19, every country ran into misinformation and disinformation and non-ability to understand which information is important and crucial and true within this pandemic. But, and the requirements by Habermas, of course, do not work. But still, what I have seen in my research, it's still ongoing, but what I have seen is that, what I see is activization of people's wish to search for information. People, especially in Russia, people do not trust official media that much. People do not trust what they see and hear from media, and they started to actively search for truthful information, which was quite a good development, I think. Another question is the pessimistic view. My own take on how the pandemic influenced public communication and political communication on the example of Russia was quite peculiar. This piece is already in publication, so I might share this with you. What I have seen in Russia, I'm not sure it was true for other countries, but I think to some extent this might be true. Russia was in a trap because people used to not to trust media, not to trust the official line. And when it was necessary to follow the official line, people could not. They were so much habituated, they were so much acquainted with the strategy of not obeying to what the government was saying, that they did not believe it. Like, they did not trust that much that the pandemic was there and the pandemic was very dangerous and so on and so forth. That was first thing. The second thing was an informationalist take of media, like informationalist approach by media. They started to pour on a lot of information in like converted pyramid style, you know, the main thing over here and then the details down there. And they were pouring and pouring the facts, pouring a lot of information, what was happening, how many deaths there were, and so on, without responding to public concerns, what people were interested in. For example, there were refrigerated trucks put near morgues where people died, where people were laying dead, because COVID corpses could not be saved, like stored together with normal corpses. But people didn't know about it. And they imagined that there was a lot of deaths which were not registered. And so on and so forth. So this informationalist approach by media without going deep was very bad, again, for the trust. So there was like a glass wall between the government who were trying to do good things actually, and people who did not trust it and couldn't get any good information, any deep information from media. It was quite a disruptive public sphere, quite a good example of a disruptive public sphere. So I will have to go too, because my lecture starts in a moment. I am very grateful to all your questions, and I was very grateful to be a part of this conference. Thank you.
Mr. Budiman, let us, our participants, give warm applause using your Zoom. And thank you for sharing your insight with us here. So all the participants, this close the second plenary session for our conference today. I'm Hasari. I will not conclude anything because I think you already get many insight, many knowledge from two of our keynote speakers this afternoon. So right now I will give back the time to Mas Yusron as the master of ceremony of this conference. Thank you. I'm Hasario. Say goodbye to you all. Thank you. Ask for you all to open up your camera so that we can have photo session. Okay. The committee already take the picture? Okay, please open up your camera, yeah, so that we can see all your fresh face in this hot afternoon in Indonesia. Thank you. There's several participants that haven't opened their camera yet. Okay. Ready? Okay. One, two, three, take the picture. Today, and soon we'll have the closing ceremony, but I will give back the time to Mas Yusron as the master of ceremony. Thank you and good day.
Excellence. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the plenary session 2, which was guided by Dr. Sri Hascaryo. Thank you very much, Dr. Sri Hascaryo. And now, we will announce the best video presentation and best paper in this conference. Best video presentation. First, resilience of batik workers women in responding to economic vulnerability by Nurul Friskadewi and Setiadi. Second, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the implementation of empowering the role of women in West Java by Ikeu Kania, Iwan Ridwan Setiaji, Retno Sunu Astuti, Nani Rohaini, and Dodi Yudiardi. Third, civil disobedience for the COVID-19 policy by Derajat Trikartono, RB Sumanto, Ahmad Zuber, Reza Dian Akbar, Theophilus Apollinaris Suryadinata. Fourth, postmodern vision on COVID-19 outbreak, a risk society experience in Surakarta by Muhammad Alif Alauddin, Faid Akila Silmi, Arif Nur Prayogi, and Yuyun Sunesti. Fifth, reading Indonesia's music industries through Adorno Critics of Popular Music by Nurli Melinda, Caesar Giovanni, Nunik Triana, and Shanas Lutfina. Sixth, strengthening village economy during pandemic by Adelia Oktarina, Febrina Elia Nababan. Seventh, hybrid space and digital diplomacy in global pandemic COVID-19 by Andrik Purwasito and Erwin Kartinawati. Last, building communication with deaf children during the COVID-19 pandemic by Maulana Rezi Ramadana, Rafiq Karsidi, Prahastiwi Utari, and Derajat Trikartono. And there are 25 best papers in this conference. First, implementation of government crisis communication during the COVID-19 by Rastri Kusumaningrum and Lina Aryani. Second, conflict resolution in community governance perspective, social capital analysis in land tenure conflict in Bebidas Village, Lombok by Aryogito Nindiatmoko, Christina Setiawati, and Rina Herlina Haryanti. The third, digital victim, Castellian perspective on education in rural Indonesia by Rina Juwita, Silviana Purwanti, and Ainun Nimatur Rohmah. Fourth, role of digital well-being in fostering psychological immunity, Key to Quality Life by Tanvir Kaur and Rajasri Roy Som. Fifth, diffusion of innovation Zoom application for kindergarten online learning communication by Lydia Agustina. Six, virtual tour, tourism in the time of Corona by Rani Rastati. 7. Regional election during COVID-19 pandemic for whom by Evi Aryatni Sintadewi and Benazir Bona Pratamawati. 8. Pandemic at the polls How to Prepare Indonesian Local Election in 2020 by Ratna Rosanti. Ninth, the role of access capacity of business actors in the new normal policy congruence in Indonesia by Aryo Wasisto and Lisnawati. 10th, non-structural institution design, an anomaly practiced in Indonesia by Christian W. Wicaksono. 11th, public satisfaction level of Aceh government performance in relation to COVID-19 responses by Yusnaidi, Mirda Fahlevi SE, and Marlizer. 12. Problem with Indonesia's rice field management policy dichotomy of central regional authority by Arditya Wicaksono and Romi Nugroho. 13. Analyzing the roles of Indonesian immigration against pandemic by Rizky Ganis Ashari, Dwi Bima Ahmad Setiawan. 14. Indonesia foreign policy in facing the rivalry of the United States versus China at the South China Sea in the COVID-19 pandemic period by Gerald Theodorus Lumban Torwan. 15. The strategy of World Uyghur Congress, or WUC, to striving for human rights for the Uyghur people by Ismah Rustam and Arida Meilan. 16. AU's resilience building in Southeast Asia, challenges and implication for ASEAN by Dao Nguyen. 17. The implementation of responsibility to protect, or R2P, in Rohingyas statelessness crisis by Salik El Munestri. 18. From Human Rights to National Security in Pakistan by Sajida Shahid and Ikra Chatol. 19. COVID-19 Responsive Village, why including person with disabilities matters by Martella Rivera Roidatwa and Dian Karinawati Imron. 20. Social capital and resource mobilization during pandemic, insight from Jogo Tonggo program in Central Java by Retna Hanani, Amri Zarkashi Rahman, and Yuliana Kristanto. 21. The optimization of Maski-based Postdaya to improve public welfare by Yoga Mahendra, Sudrajat, and Nasiwan. 22. Resilience of women tourism workers during the COVID-19 pandemic in Bali by Nimade Ari Widyastini, Siti Anissa Sylvia Rosa, Roni Eka Putra, Gabriela Susilowati, and Toto Hariwibowo. 23. Women's economic empowerment in post-conflict settings, a pressing commitment after the COVID-19 by Ana Balen Perianes Burmades. 24. Nahdlatul Ulama's political face on social media in 2019 presidential election by Leni Winarni and Firdastin Rutnia Yudiningrum. 25. Public spare for gender mainstreaming program of the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries of the Republic of Indonesia by Lucy Max. Once again, we congratulate for who are chosen as the best video presentation and the best papers. And we also would like to grant a gratitude for all the participants in this event. Ladies and gentlemen, the last agenda of this conference is closing ceremony. We are inviting Honorable Dr. Ahmad Zubair, SOS DEA, to give the closing speech in the 6th International Conference on Social and Political Sciences. Dr. Ahmad Zubair, SOS DEA, time is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. How are you? I hope everyone is fine and happy today. First of all, I would like to say my Honorable Rector Universitas 11 Maret Surakarta, Bapak Profesor Dr. Jamal Wibowo SHM, my Honorable Dean Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas 11 Maret Surakarta, Ibu Profesor Dr. Ismi Dwi Astuti Nurhaini MSI, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Andre N. Rahmanta, distinguished guests and participants of the 6th International Conference on Social and Political Sciences, ICOSAP 2020, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas 11 Maret Surakarta, Indonesia. We have been participating for 2 days in the 6th International Conference on Social and Political Sciences, ICOSAP 2020, with theme Strengthening Resilient Society in the Disruptive Era. October 7 to 8, 2020, Universitas 11 Maret Surakarta, Indonesia. On behalf of the organizer of this conference, it is indeed my pleasure to make a few closing remarks and to express gratitude to all those who have given support to this event. The 6th International Conference on Social and Political Sciences, ICOSAP 2020, is the annual agenda of the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas 11 Maret Surakarta. ICOSAP 2020 has been successfully held in a virtual or online conference because this international conference has been held during the global pandemic situation of COVID-19. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say that the author's enthusiasm has not diminished and the excitement has been present during the online event. The main aim of this conference is to exchange information and experience. This conference key goal of exchange information and expertise has been successfully accomplished. All participants made their online presentation, which will be broadcast on YouTube channel ICOSAP 2020 by the committee. I have watched some videos and they are very good and very interesting videos. I congratulate for all. The 20 chosen speakers gave a live presentation. These 20 chosen presenters come from Indonesia and overseas from different public entities, professional and academic. We would like to thank the keynote speakers, live presenters, non-live presenters, all participants, and the ICOSAP 2020 committee for their engagement, endless support, and cooperation. Last but not least, I hope that the ICOSAP 2020 network we have created can be continued and expanded to advance the development of knowledge and public problem solving. Once again, I congratulate ICOSAP 2020 on the success that has been achieved. I wish you all of you keep warm memories about this conference, and please forgive us for the inconvenience in this conference. See you in the next ICOSAP. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that was the closing of the 6th International Conference on Social and Political Sciences, Strengthening Resilient Society in the Disruptive Era. Finally, we have come to the end of the conference today. Hopefully, you found this 2 days conference fruitful and useful. On behalf of the host and the committee, we would like to extend our deepest appreciation for all the supports and participation in this event. We would also like to ask you apologize for the mistakes and the inconvenience during this conference. We hope that we will meet you again in the next international conference hosted by the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas 11 Maret, Indonesia. Once again, thank you, goodbye, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Tanya di mana?
Thank you for all participants. Thank you very much.
Tiap bulan. Sampai pira kita ya? Oh, nek wis ngono ki terbit gitu toh. Oh.
Oke, Mas. Aku punya, Mas. Jangan nggak ikut dalam motor paut. Aku mau. Kami tak pernah terus.
Ada di dalam ada ya, ininya ya, perbaikan ya. Ya. Mau catatan perbaikan terus ya, bikin satu folder enggak tinggal. Kalau melakukan kegiatan.
Faculty of Social and Political Sciences of Universitas 11 Maret is one of the 12 faculties in Universitas 11 Maret, a prominent university located in Surakarta City, Central Java, Indonesia. It has a strong tradition to carry out education and research as well as community services. One of the routine agendas of the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences of Universitas 11 Maret, Indonesia is International Conference on Social and Political Sciences, or ICOSSEPS. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the 6th International Conference on Social and Political Sciences, organized by the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences of Universitas 11 Maret, Indonesia. We do support this prestigious conference, which is attended by more than 200.